Hello guys, welcome to Daddy Share Space. In this video I'm demonstrating one of the ways I utilize both my Dewalt and Milwaukee battery powered table saws. As a full-time registered nurse, my time in the shop is limited. Candidly, I did not account for all of the potential setbacks that life presents when I decided to embark down this journey of extreme DIY woodworking. I mentioned in a past video that I purchased the Dewalt FlexVolt table saw soon after I purchased my Dewalt FlexVolt miter saw. That has the ability to be powered by both battery and via traditional power with the use of an adapter. Back when I purchased the table saw, there were still rumors that Dewalt would make an adapter for the saw. Several years later, we can assume that Dewalt has since abandoned the idea of providing an adapter for this table saw. I see having a dual powered saw as being very handy as it offers maximum flexibility. That's why I've been considering getting the Flex 10-inch saw. The Dewalt FlexVolt table saw has met most of my expectations, though there was one curious omission, and that was the lack of the ability to accommodate a dado stack. Not long after I purchased the Dewalt, Milwaukee released its battery-powered table saw option. Having already owned many 18-volt Milwaukee tools and armed with the knowledge that the Milwaukee table saw was dado blade compatible, I took the plunge, justifying my purchase with the logic that purchasing 2 additional FlexVolt batteries would be comparable to buying the Milwaukee table saw. Adding a second saw would provide me with the opportunity to set the first saw up for one cut and then to set up the second saw for a secondary cut, as I'm doing here in this video. While trimming the rounded edges off of big box 2x4s, I can cut one edge off of all of my boards and then process the opposite side with the second saw. This method allows me to get all of my boards to the exact same dimension, even if I don't make all the cuts at the same time. I've had times in the shop when I would mill up some boards, moving the fence to cut the second portion, only to find that I did not mill up enough boards. When I tried to reproduce the exact same dimensions, the boards always seemed to be off. To combat this, I use 2 saws that are fixed in their respective positions to ensure similar results. In the past, I would try to cut off one rounded edge and then I would use a finished board to set the second cutting position to attempt to make the exact same board using one saw. As I stated before, the results were not as accurate as I would have liked. The final cut would either be too narrow or a bit oversized. This would lead to inaccuracies that affected the final build. Usually I would just press on with the project regardless, taking note that I needed to change my process in order to ensure better results the next time around. This process obviously requires more space, but it's also a great way for me to compare the saws in real time while performing similar actions. Something I've noticed over time is that all of my Dewalt batteries from my original purchase are still going strong. Conversely, I slowed up using my Milwaukee because of one of the 12 amp hour batteries that had stopped charging, leaving me with only one battery to use between the Milwaukee table saw and my 12-inch miter saw. Even with increased reliance on the FlexVolt, the tool and batteries are going strong. Recently, I finally broke down and spent $250 plus to purchase a newer version of the Milwaukee 12 amp hour battery, so I plan to put the Milwaukee table saw back into the rotation. Over time, I will provide my own feedback about how I feel the saws are doing comparing one to the other. Last year, I added an additional Festool branded battery-powered saw to my shop. It has some interestingly unique features, including a digital display and a sliding table. I do not consider the Festool to be in the same class as my other saws. It has its own unique capabilities, but I do not feel as comfortable pushing it as hard as I do the Milwaukee and Dewalt. That could be because the saw in the stand is over 4 times the price as the other options. I know I do not need another battery-powered saw, but I must admit I'm intrigued by the Flex offering, as on paper, it can replace both the Milwaukee and Dewalt saws while offering a 10-inch cut capacity and an AC adapter for longer cut sessions, which would be great. I am going to keep my Festool for smaller, intricate tasks as it seems to excel in that workflow. It's been several years of me going down this journey of trying to learn more about DIY, woodworking, and so on and so forth. And Obviously, I have grossly underestimated the process. That being, the more that I learn about DIY, the more that I want to DIY. An example of that obviously is me wanting to work on all my cars on my own, me wanting to do the yard on my own, me wanting to fix, things around the house, plumbing, toilets, stuff like that. It makes for a full life. I mean, I may set out to want to learn a particular skill to make a cabinet or perfect some kind of process, and yet something will break down that needs to be attended to that takes priority over everything else, over my learning, if you will, or my regular job for that instance. And all of this process, this journey that I've gone down with the YouTube and with the woodworking, it immediately falls to the background simply because, I don't make my living doing woodworking. I don't make my living doing DIY. I don't make my living doing YouTube. The most amount of money I've seen in a month from YouTube through the YouTube ad revenue is only about $160 or so. If I had a mindset of trying to make the money back from all of my tool purchases, I'm not headed in the right direction. Though, admittedly, that was not my plan from the beginning. When I decided to start purchasing the tools that I bought, especially the Festool branded tools, it was more so to complete a process that I have in my own mind, in my own head. I've personally found that using more precision type tools, it kind of takes away a lot of the building of jigs and, having to make bulkier items to do, like, whether it be repeatable cuts and, having to keep a whole bunch of scraps around the shop. You can be more precise from the beginning. If you, start off with, like, say, bench dogs or woodpeckers, measuring and marking tools, you're relying upon the accuracy that you're paid for. If you're using something like a Mafel or a Festool tool, you're relying upon the engineering that you paid for versus, say, if you bought, let's say, a Ryobi branded tool, let's say a Ryobi circular saw, and let's say you didn't know about track saws, and so you decided, I want to make a straight cut. And so if you're a novice, you're going to come up with all these different methods to try. Maybe you may try to cut it by freehand, and then you don't get the experience that you want in the end. Or maybe you learn about purchasing, maybe you get a Ryobi track saw, and you get a better experience as far as making a straight cut. But then you decide, I want to do repeatable cuts. And so then you start doing research about finding a parallel guide system to work with the Ryobi track saw. And then that's when you run into a dead end and you recognize that you spent about $400 on a Ryobi branded saw that does not have a lot of aftermarket or first party accessories to give you the ability to do the repeatable cuts. Now, of course, in any instance, you can make your own DIY hardware to do that, but then you end up making a whole bunch of jigs and a whole bunch of DIY accessories to probably make something inferior to what's already been created. And even though I know that buying an aftermarket or a manufactured or engineered item is going to cost you more money up front, you always have to weigh out what's more important, time or money. And for myself, when I started going down this DIY journey, I realized up front that I'm not going to have a ton of time to work in the shop. So at the same time of me trying to spend some time learning skills, on the other hand, I'm trying to figure out how to get to the end goal as fast as I possibly can. When I look at, obviously Festool, when I look at something like a dashboard table, like when you watch some of the videos that I've watched from Dashboard site and you see how the table is used, I get the same impression of how it was when I first saw the domino. It seems like anybody can pick up that item or that tool and, basically get the results that, a professional would get. Now, hindsight 2020, I own a domino. I've owned it for years, and there is a little bit of a learning curve to anything that you get However, it's a little bit more challenging when you buy, say, a tool that does not specialize in doing a certain thing. Like if you just buy a conventional circular saw and you're trying to get track saw type quality, I'm not saying it's not possible, but there's a lot of workarounds, a lot of, as I said before, jigs that you may have to build to get that type of experience. I mean, it's easy. Like if you're doing something small, you can just use a speed square and put your plate up against that speed square to, cut some 2x lumber. But even in that process, the engineering of a track saw offers the ability to, when you make your first cut, it's a zero clearance. So when you lay down that track, that's the line that's going to be cut. Whereas if you're, say, a weekend warrior, a DIYer, maybe you're not a person that's going to be doing projects that often, you always have to keep in mind, I need to measure from the plate to the blade to understand how far away I need to set that up. And you need to be mindful of that all the time. Now, if you're a little bit more intuitive, you may build a jig to do that so you don't have to think about it. Or maybe you're the type of person that you can retain those numbers in your mind all the time. Like, say, for instance, I don't know, I've never done that ever on any of my circular saws, but let's say one has, like, say, a 3-inch from the edge of the plate to the circular saw blade, and another one maybe is 2 3/4, and maybe you have more than one type of saw. And so you would have to keep all those numbers in your head and keep that in mind whenever you're trying to make that cut, and then balance that out with, okay, how do I make a straight cut over a span of material, whether it be 24 inches, 36 inches, 48 inches, or longer. And so then that would cause you to either try to mill up maybe a 2x4, or maybe you'll use a level, or all these different things. But then you're relying upon, like, say if you use a level, just a typical off the shelf big box store level, you are banking on the fact of that being straight. And if it's not straight, because the price is going to kind of let you know about how accurate it is. Even though we may consider a level, it will be straight. That makes sense. In theory, the function of a level, having those little bubble tubes inside of it, the goal is to show you plumb versus not plumb, and not necessarily that is a machine straight edge. A machine straight edge is very different than a level. Whereas when you look at, when you bring a track saw back into the equation, the track saw was made for a degree of precision. It was designed to have a zero cut line, which takes thought out. And I don't know how other people think, but the more things you have to think about, the more things you have to keep in your head, the more chances there are that you're going to make some kind of an error or make a mistake in your project, which, like with woodworking, I've come to realize, like, if you add, an eighth to an eighth, then you got a fourth, and then a fourth to a fourth, you got a half. And, as your errors continue to compound, you end up going from something that was supposed to be square with 90-degree angles to some kind of a parallelogram or something else, and not getting the experience that you want. So as I've tackled this woodworking / DIY journey, I'm looking at it from more than one angle. One angle is, yes, I want to learn the physical skills, which I do believe is probably the most important thing. But from the other angle, I want to take out, if I can afford it, any kind of extra knowledge that I must need to acquire. I know that if I buy that circular saw, I have to take those steps as I mentioned before. If I buy that track saw and it is properly tuned to the rail, that part goes away. When I need to make a 48-inch cut, then I would simply get a 55-inch or greater rail. I would purchase an accessory such as a right angle square to make it perpendicular. My cut, that rail square would go perpendicular to my cut that I'm going to make, and that would ensure my 90 degrees. And based upon that, I would build my project out versus me trying to, the way I see it in my mind is manufacture all of that out of thin air. So imagine if you just took two pieces of wood and your goal was to make that into a right angle, an exact 90 degrees. Well, you would need something that measured that. You would need something that told you that that was 90 degrees. And when you look at the fine print of stuff like woodpecker tools or bench dog tools, they say that these tools are accurate to within like 1,000th of an inch across the length of the blade, which lets you know that that is not 100% accurate. It's close to perfect, but it's not perfect. So imagine a person, especially if you're not a machinist of some type, trying to get those type of accurate results manually. I mean, just imagine, go get a 2x4 that's not going to be straight. Even if you cut the ends off and try your best to make it, 90 degrees, square on each side, and then you take that 2x4 and you essentially butt it up against another 2x4 and try to make that into a perfect 90 that you can always reference off of, to do project A, project B, project C, all the way down to Z. And then you start to recognize that, okay, if I want good, consistent results, maybe I should leave that part to someone else. Unless, of course, that's something you fancy. If you fancy trying to get to a place of accuracy on your own, well, that's a level of DIY within itself. And I can't argue against trying to do that. I mean, that would give you such freedom from having to buy a manufacturer's product. But if time is of essence for you, if you don't have a lot of time but you have a little bit more money than you have time, then it may be more beneficial for you to just go ahead and drop the coin and buy the thing so that you can get to that end product or that end goal that you want to do. For myself personally, I have received my fair share of criticism on this channel. Not a lot, but some, where people, ask, questions like, what do I build? Or, what's the point? So on and so forth, which, everybody has the right to ask a question. There's no problem with that in of itself. But, with my personality type, I don't necessarily feel like I need to actually justify or explain what I'm doing and or why I'm doing it. As I've mentioned many times before, I work as a registered nurse, and I did a little video about how I bought some tools from this company. What is it called? Leatherman. And they have all these little like gadgety type tools with all these different types of, like screwdrivers, box wrenches, and all these things on it. And then I make sure I have some kind of like a headlamp, because oftentimes we work in the dark. And I make sure I have multiple pins. Like I'm always trying to stay ready for whatever may come my way. And just the other day at work, there was a computer monitor that was fixed to an arm, and it was, it had come loose and the monitor wouldn't stay straight. And so I pulled out my Leatherman bracelet that had a few Allen keys on it, and luckily one of them fit. And I was able to tighten up that monitor so that it was no longer jostling around. So we didn't have to call in another department to come fix that. On another occasion, the whole tray that the computer keyboard was sitting on had come loose. And I was able to take the hex wrench of that same bracelet, take off those bolts, access the Phillips screws that were underneath the plate, tighten those up, and then put the whole thing back together. And this is all while in between me, doing my regular job, which is, taking care of my, my patient. Whereas, say a nurse that comes before me or comes after me that doesn't have that type of DIY mindset, they'd be, like typing at a 70-degree angle or, turning their head the other way because the monitor is off. The other side of that is because, like when you look at automobiles, when you look at homes and the components that all these things are made up of, we seem to be in a time where everything is being produced and manufactured to have a certain type of lifespan. And as a result, like say if you buy everything, like if you say you buy a brand new home and it's got a brand new stove, brand new washer dryer, brand new refrigerator, brand new HVAC system, brand new roof, brand new plumbing. Well, if you don't put those things on some kind of a staggered schedule, all of that stuff is going to go bad at the same time. And especially if it's years later into owning the home and the value of the home goes up accordingly, you may end up, if you didn't save for it, spending a whole lot of money, maybe even a strong percentage of the price of your home, just getting all of those things back to baseline, i.e., you may have to replace your roof, you may have to replace your HVAC system, you may have to, replace toilets, or, all of these different things that you're going to have to do over time to continue to maintain your home, because it was not built to last forever. It was only built to last a certain span of time. And if you listen to some outlets, they would say that the house is only built to last, the stick and frame homes that we build today are only meant to last for 40 years. So if you think about it, if you get a 30-year mortgage, that means you're only going to have 10 years of not having to pay that mortgage before you're going to dang near have to do replacement costs for the whole home, simply because it's going to fall apart because of the construction methods that we choose and the materials that we choose. Now, when you look at things like, if you break down, say, like a project like a bathroom job or a kitchen job or a tile job or any of these things, siding, painting, if you decided to take on DIY skills as a hobby, as something, I don't really like to call it a hobby, but let's call it a hobby. Let's say you find enjoyment in doing these things, then you can save yourself a great deal of money from being upcharged, because when a professional does the jobs for you, they have to charge for all of their overhead. They bought all the equipment, they have all the equipment, they have invested in all the tools, and maybe they have people working for them, and all of that stuff has to be met, in order for you to be serviced. And so you have to, as the customer, pay for all that. And if you are a conscious person like myself, and you recognize that, wait a minute, let me do the math. If I put a little sweat equity into this and do something myself, there is a chance that I can come out ahead. Maybe not in everything, maybe not everything is legal for me to do myself, but everything that is legal for me to do, if I can get myself, just like a person would want to be more healthy and work out, you may not want to work out, but you do it because of the benefits, the same thing. If you challenge yourself to DIY a lot of things in your life, what you're doing is making yourself financially healthier, which personally I find to be a asset, not just to you, but to your family and to those that know you, friends, so on and so forth. And even if you don't do it yourself, if you have an understanding of what needs to be done, you can also protect yourself when you have to deal with a professional that may not have your best interest in mind when they go to billing you. Anyways, guys, I want to thank you for taking time to watch this video, and I hope to see you in my next one. Take care.